Our guest today is Lieutenant Governor of the state of Illinois. She is a lawyer, teacher, and working mother. Her mission in public service has been to make government more accountable, more accessible, and transparent to the taxpayers of Illinois. Our guest today graduated from Georgetown University's law school in 1987. Her parents, the late Jean and the late United States Senator Paul Simon, devoted their entire lives to public service. Our guest today and her husband Perry, let's give Perry a round of applause. Perry, thank you, are the proud parents of two beautiful daughters, Riley and Brennan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the City Club of Chicago, Sheila Simon. Sheila?
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I am glad to be here with everyone, and particularly with my husband. We've been married 25 years, and he still comes to listen to my speeches. I appreciate that. Thank you, Perry. Well, I want to have a few remarks, but then save lots of time for questions because Art Berman said he would ask really hard ones. But I'll start off with the question that I get most often when I speak with college groups, which is, why the heck would you be involved in politics in Illinois? It's kind of creepy and gross. They don't always say that, but you can see. That's in the little thought bubble above their head. And I suppose the answer is, as Jay, you mentioned both mom and dad, and they met when they served together in the state legislature and would go out to inspect public institutions as their dates. How geeky is that? Which tells you a little bit about my genetic geekiness. But anyway, so a lot of folks know and worked with mom and dad. Betty Lou, you certainly devoted a whole lot of time to working with dad, and he sure valued you. But not everyone, I think, knows about Grandpa Simon, which is maybe as much of an influence on me as mom and dad. And Betty Lou, I'm sure you've heard countless times the story that Dad would tell about Grandpa Martin. And I know when my brother and I were little, we thought, do we have to hear this again? But Dad would tell the story about when he was a kid, growing up in Oregon, which he didn't always mention when campaigning in Illinois, is that he grew up in Oregon. And Grandpa was a Lutheran minister. He had his regular congregation. He also had a weekly Lutheran radio show. And during World War II, there was a lot of fear on the West Coast. And a lot of people were concerned about Japanese invasion. And what was the response of the United States of America? It's very embarrassing to look back at it now. Rounded up citizens, American citizens of Japanese descent, and put them in internment camps on the West Coast. Many of the citizens were taken from Oregon and moved to camps in Oregon and other places. But this was popularly supported. This was supported by our Supreme Court, as a matter of fact, in one of their very bad decisions. Grandpa Simon spoke out against internment of Japanese citizens. It was very unpopular to take that position because no one was taking that position. He was speaking up for folks who had no voice in the process. And Dad, as a kid, was very embarrassed by this, right? All of his friends teased him about this, and so he talked to Grandpa and he said, you really need to change what you're saying about this. And of course, Grandpa didn't. And as Dad grew, he looked back at that and thought that was really Grandpa Simon's greatest moment. And that what Dad learned from that is really the measure that he applied to so many things, so many folks, is do you do what's right even when it's not easy? And so that's in answer to that question, why are you in this? I suppose it's in order to pass that Grandpa Simon test, which I'm still working on. Thank you, I appreciate that. And Jay mentioned, after law school, graduating from Georgetown, I had plenty of opportunities to to make a lot of money. Instead I chose to work at Land of Lincoln Legal Assistance, which is our downstate federal legal assistance office, and really enjoyed that. I remember the first time I had a case, I worked on family law issues, housing evictions, foreclosures, those kinds of things. The first case where I was in court and I had a lawyer on the other side was an order protection case, and I was representing the wife. This was in Murfreesboro, Illinois, and the husband admitted during the hearing that he had, in fact, pointed a gun at my client's head. And so the lawyer for Pug was his name. It's hard to forget that. The lawyer for Pug said in his closing argument to the judge, "Your Honor, my client will admit that he pointed the gun at his wife's head, but never once did he fire." Right, so I'm a brand new attorney, and I'm sure my jaw just went down to the table. So this is what, and the judge was Judge Richmond, a very cranky old guy, and he did this. And lawyers in the room know this is like, no, I got you. You don't need to stand up and have a heart attack because this case is so over. Was essentially what Judge Richmond said with his eyebrows in his hand. So I was very relieved, and of course my client got her order of protection. I later worked at the state's attorney's office and prosecuted a lot of cases that weren't so easy as the case against Pug. But were all that important to every person who is a victim of crime, and it was a pleasure to work there. And I'm thinking about the Grandpa Simon test, and certainly it was the right thing to do. Was it ever hard? And we were talking about this yesterday. There was one evening when I was working at the prosecutor's office, and the girls were little. Perry and I have 2 daughters. They were little. They were already tucked in. And Perry and I are in the living room, and a rock goes through the glass part of our screen door. And right away I think of who's the creepiest guy that I'm prosecuting right now. And I came up with one who rose to the top of the list. And Perry said, "Who did I give a bad grade to?" I don't know what the rock was from, but it was funny how we each thought of how we offend people. So from the prosecutor's office, then I went to the law school, Southern Illinois University School of Law, where I helped to start up a domestic violence clinic, where again represented survivors of domestic violence. But the really good part about working there was that I got to train students to understand domestic violence as well and to represent survivors. And I value that because I know that all these students who go out into the world and mostly practice in Illinois now might not be every day representing victims of domestic violence, but I know that every day they understand it better, and they understand how this has an impact on the people who they're representing or who are appearing before them as judges. So I think that passes the Grandpa Simon test too. As Lieutenant Governor, I get to do the same kind of thing on a bigger scale. Still have been working on domestic violence issues. And again, for any attorneys in the audience, I'll take your card before we leave, because here's a really cool opportunity. We have set up what we call a virtual legal clinic. It connects lawyers who want to volunteer a half-hour pro bono time on whatever basis you want to do it, once a month, once a year, you name it. With survivors of domestic violence who have already gotten their order of protection. So they've gotten their immediate safety needs wrapped up, but they need to figure out what's the next step. If I have kids, do I need a lawyer? If I have a car that I have titled with my now former boyfriend, what do we do about that? What's the next step that I take? The difference about this clinic is that we connect the people by Skype. So we've got lawyers here in Chicago who could be in their PJs at home, as a matter of fact, connecting with survivors where there's a lot of unmet legal need in Jacksonville and Peoria, and we're just about to start in Cairo. So a really nice way to combine people who want to help and people who need help. Also gotten to work on education issues. In fact, the last time I was here, I talked about community colleges. I had just finished visiting all 48 community colleges in the state and talking about ways that we can make sure that we move from doing a good job of getting people into college and following through and doing a good job of getting them across the stage at graduation. So what can we do to do a better job on completion? And I think across the state, people are responding to that. More recently, we've been focusing on college affordability. With 2 daughters in college, we know these issues. One of them with Father Dennis, so thanks for doing what you can on affordability. But that's the biggest non-academic barrier, and we've been able to work some on that, and that's been a real pleasure. And then here's another one that I'm really sure passes the Grandpa Simon test, working on guns and concealed carry issues. And this one, frankly, as Lieutenant Governor, would be really easy for me to duck, right? I don't have to vote. I could just walk away from this issue, but it's an issue where it's just a weird set of circumstances. We got the 7th Circuit telling us we need to have a law, it needs to be in place by June, and we have an issue that doesn't divide up so much on political grounds as it does on regional grounds. And the conversations we have on these issues are horrible, right? We start a conversation and we're pulled apart, and people start using vocabulary that drives us even farther apart. So what I did was organize a firearms working group. I pulled together all the freshman House and Senate members, and Republican, Democratic, top of the state, bottom of the state, and we created what was essentially a classroom. We didn't invite the media. And we made it, I tried to create the atmosphere of maybe a middle school health class where everyone felt free to raise their hand and ask that question. And it worked pretty well. We listened to gun owners, responsible gun owners from Southern Illinois. We met with grieving parents who had lost children to gun violence in a church basement in Chicago. And if you listen to the talking points and the rhetoric, you'll hear huge divergence. But when listening to real residents of the state of Illinois who've had a lot of opportunity to think about this, what we hear is that there's room to be constitutional and to be safe at the same time. So I've enjoyed working on that. But let me tell you a little bit more about what we've done in the area of transparency, because I think this is something that crosses a lot of different subject areas, and something that we can do even in an era where we don't have much money to spend in government. I think we can work on being more transparent and getting some good results from that. One of the areas that I focused on was thanks to that community college tour, and thanks in part to our experience of helping our daughters look at what colleges they might want to go to, was an idea that we call the College Choice Report. In the same way that you can have a can of soda, which I'll have a Mountain Dew later this afternoon, and I know on the side of it there will be how many calories are in the Mountain Dew, and I could compare that to how many calories are in a candy bar or a package of chips or whatever it might be. And it's really easy to compare from one product to another. There's not a really easy way to compare college costs from one college to another. And so we set about trying to make a statewide college choice report. It was such a good idea. And I think, by the way, that the president and his staff are listening in to speeches at the City Club, because after we proposed it and worked on it some, the president stole that idea. And we're really glad, because he put it to work, he got it all done. So if you're interested in this, it's at the White House website, and they call it a college scorecard. And it is exactly what we were talking about. It helps you compare costs in a way that is comparable from one institution to another. Really useful for people who are going to have a challenge paying for college, which is just about everyone. College choice, college report cards. The other transparency that we're working on, and this is really fun, is tax receipts for your state taxes. If you file electronically, you send something in, you get something back that says, yep, thanks, got it. What we want to add to that thanks, got it memo is some information about how we spend money as a state. It could be as simple as a pie chart that says we're spending this amount on education, this amount on healthcare, this amount on public safety. And I think it will get more people engaged in what that tax money does. So we're excited about that, and working with the Governor's Office of Management and Budget and the Revenue Department to get that going. Very exciting stuff. But the one that is maybe the geekiest, but I think can have the most impact, that we've been working on for quite some time, is updating and improving the Statement of Economic Interest. So if you're the Lieutenant Governor, if you're on your library board, if you're on your city council, you're filling out a 2-page 2 sides of one piece of paper form every year. I see many heads nodding. There are people who have to fill this out. It's due May 15th, by the way. If you haven't done yours yet, get on the ball. And for those of you who have filled it out, you know what? You write on almost every answer. Not applicable, right? Because the questions are really wacky. Stupid. I heard someone say stupid. I think that's right. So it's just not effective. It is not effective disclosure. And if we had effective disclosure, we would be able to do a better job of telling whether public servants are actually that, whether they are public servants or serving themselves. And I think, here's the good news, the answer is overwhelmingly public servants are in it to serve the public. And if we had a little bit better disclosure, then we'd be able to know that on our own. Now, Perry and I go way overboard. Every year we release our tax records, a detailed statement of our income and assets. I ask some of my senior staff members to do the same. They complain, but they do it. And I appreciate that. Katie, Leslie, Maria, whoever else is up to that, we appreciate that. And that's just to demonstrate, hey, we can do this and it really doesn't hurt too much. The statement of economic interest that we're working on and that is in the Senate right now, I think has a chance of passing. I talked with President Cullerton about it this morning. When you talk with legislators about most bills that you're working on, their questions are going to be, how will this affect my district? What will the people in my district think about this? But when you talk with them about income and asset disclosure for public officials, their question is, what am I going to have to reveal? And it's a little bit harder to persuade. It's not easy, but it's the right thing to do. And I think that certainly passes the Grandpa Simon test, but it also passes the dad test. And I'm not selling this book, by the way. I did have a question about that. This is one of Dad's colleagues at SIU went through Dad's old newspaper columns and pulled the best of them. And it's not something that you want to read cover to cover, and I haven't been. There's no plot, right? So we've kept it at their old house in McAnda, and over this last weekend, I was reading a column of Dad's from 1971, and let me just see if this rings true at all. If what has happened in Illinois doesn't make it proof positive that we need strict income disclosure laws for all state elected officials and their key appointees, I don't know what else it would take. If we fail to pass a strong measure, all of us who hold office will continue to suffer in the eyes of the public. Put matters on the table in public view, and then the citizenry can make reasoned judgments whether we're serving ourselves or serving the public. So in some ways, it's like really reinforcing, wow, I'm on the right track. This is exactly what Dad talked about. Of course, in some ways, it's disappointing that 40 years later, we're still talking about the same thing. But we have started to change the climate, right? When Dad was lieutenant governor and disclosed everything down to my babysitting income, literally, I'm not joking, that was really unusual. But now it's kind of a standard. It's an expectation that if you're running for a high position, you ought to disclose your tax returns, right? And I think we can keep moving that culture towards more transparency, and that will be a good thing for all of us. So I think that maybe helps explain a little bit about what I do, what test I'm trying to live up to, and in addition to the Grandpa Simon test of doing that which is right, even though it's not always easy. The gloss that I add onto it is looking at it from the perspective of our daughters, of our 2 daughters. And I think that's really what drives everyone, right? Is your daughters or your nephews or your grandchildren looking forward, and how do we make the part of the world where we have some reach a better place? So that's a little bit about why I do what I do, why I enjoy working for you, why I enjoy working with you, and hope to do so on a continuing basis. So with that said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. This is good. Lots of questions. People have been listening.
Good thing our staff wasn't Paul Revere. Okay, let me just draw them out. Can't help myself. Oh, I have a question. Big print. I wonder who wrote this. Lieutenant Governor Simon. Future plans, like in the next 18 months.
What a
wrote it. I just, I collect.
What a good question. I ought to have some future plans. I suppose the answer to that is I'm not the first domino in the row, but actively looking at ways that I can continue to serve the state of Illinois and have an increased impact. So that's the answer, and we'll keep you posted.
Okay. I'm going to be incredibly polite, not only because I respect her dad and herself, but she's hosting a breakfast for my wife in Northwestern Hospital in 2 weeks on women's health. So I'm going to be Mr. Courteous, just so you know.
Thank you.
I hate to disappoint my fans out there. Okay. Diana Conley, Avotech, Inc. How are you proposing gun control that is safe and constitutional?
Okay.
Good question.
Right. It's a good question. So here's the limit. The Seventh Circuit says, as the last state who doesn't have any kind of concealed carry, that in their interpretation, which is the interpretation we are bound by, right? Even if we don't like it, that's the interpretation that covers us right now, until the Supreme Court gets to it, and there are differing opinions in different jurisdictions. So I think one way or another the Supreme Court will work on this. But the Seventh Circuit has said you have to have some kind of concealed carry possible. Different jurisdictions have approved a range of all-out concealed carry. There are some states that are what's called open carry, which just means you got a gun, grab it and bring it to lunch. And some states are much more restrictive and require someone to demonstrate that they have a need to have that firearm in order to be able to get the permit. And even these restrictive states have been upheld by their federal courts. So I think we have some room to be restrictive, but to still say that some people are qualified and can safely carry a firearm in places that we say as a state you can carry a firearm, right? In the firearm working group that we had, we set up, and not everyone on the working group agreed with this, but a big chunk of them did. We had a 10-item checklist about what we should be talking about, because so often the conversation is just, is it going to be may issue or shall issue? And that's it's almost misleading, because even states that are described as shall issue can be very restrictive even within that category. But there are some things that we need to address, like, are there areas that we want to say, no matter what, no matter where you are in the state, you can't have a firearm here, like in schools, for example. And one of the days in our firearm working group, we had teachers, administrators, higher education, grade school, and boy, they were unanimous. The folks that we had in that room, we don't want guns at school. We don't want to carry guns. We don't want to be trained to do that. We just want to have them barred at the door. So I think there are ways, and by the way, this voice doesn't get heard very often, but responsible gun owners are really, many of them, okay with the idea of restrictions. And once I announced that I was starting up this working group, gosh, I got a lot of email from people that I know in Southern Illinois and Central Illinois who've said, wow, thank you for listening, because the talking points from the NRA don't represent me as a gun owner. That was a pretty common area. So I think we do have room to be both constitutional, to meet what the Seventh Circuit says we have to do, but to place reasonable limits on that. And I think one of the things we need to do along the way is to make sure that that FOID process, the process that says you're okay to own a firearm in the state of Illinois, is funded and is functioning. A lot of state police officers working on that very hard, not able to keep up with the load. We need to make sure that's a system that works well.
Hey, Father, this place, we never allow guns in this place. It would be at any moment, this could be, especially against you-know-who, right, Stella? All right. Joy Saxon, City Club board member, change the pace. Is it true that Pell Grant recipients take the grant money and then drop out?
There are some challenges with grant money, but by and large, most of the folks who get grant money, the money doesn't even cover the basics, right? Is this correct, Father Dennis? Yeah. And let me just give you one example of that. The folks who are eligible for a Pell Grant can also apply for a MAP grant, a state grant that helps them, that used to, when it started off, cover 100% of the financial need for 100% of those students who are eligible. So if you were a very low-income person and you got your Pell Grant, the MAP grant would make sure that you could go to college. And that amount has stayed the same for that the state puts in there as tuition has gone up everywhere, across the board. And so now what used to cover 100% of the need for 100% of the people covers half of the need for half of the people. So you know, in the last year, I visited all 12 of the public four-year colleges and universities. At every campus, I met with students, administrators, and faculty. At every student group, I would ask them about the cost of textbooks. And it's like going to an auction. One will say, I paid $500 this semester, and the other will say, I paid $700, or my roommate paid $900. Huge expenses. There are some ways around that. Eastern Illinois University, SIU Edwardsville, both have campus-wide textbook rental programs. It means that the cost of your textbook is built into your tuition. You know it. It's based on the number of credit hours you're taking. At those two campuses, when I asked about school books, the students said, I wish I don't know. Because it was something they could budget for. It was something they could plan for. It really helped them. But I bring up the textbooks because so many students are trying to make it without buying the textbooks. As a teacher, I can tell you this, and I've had students who have been struggling and trying to make it through my law class without buying the textbook, right? They go to the library right after class, they go to the library right before class and get the copy of the book that's on reserve. It's a horrible way to educate yourself, right? But there are so many students who are trying to do that, who are working their full 20-hour student work job, working off campus in another part-time job, and taking a full load as students. This is a huge thing that we're asking them to do. So in answer to the question, there are some abuses in some cases, but for the vast majority of people who are getting some kind of student loan, it is all that's keeping them there, and often not enough.
I like you inherited one thing from your dad, short answers. I'm on my best behavior. What can I? Okay, 1968, Paul Simon was running for lieutenant governor, and he won, and helped break the law, make the law where you have to run together because Ogilvy was governor, he won for governor, and he needed a driver in Chicago, and the famous Neil Hartigan said, Paul Green will drive you, no problem. Brian, sound familiar? Absolutely. So I drove her dad around and actually brought him to the 50th Ward, and he just, you thought he was going to go off for a chocolate phosphate afterwards. Here we go. Andre Bacallo, where are you? Okay. Bacalao. Well, listen, you know, we need more Irish names, a lot easier. Okay. Question on human beings, statement of economic interest. Keep it simple. Copy of tax returns. Why not limit it to copy of tax returns? Consistent housing. This is like a code. Why don't you ask the question?
It's very simple. What I'm asking is, you know, in service to what you're talking about, what I'd be interested as a voter to find out is, what are you telling the IRS as a politician? What are you telling the state of Illinois? More so than esoteric value of assets. That's one. The second thing is, you know, consistency. So that if I'm asking, you know, a relatively low-ranking member of, you know, the state house to do something, then I expect people that are considered at a higher level to also have the same report, so that the governor is not exempt, or XYZ.
Right.
That's the basic question.
I like those basic questions. So, in answer to number 2, the statement of economic interest is, everyone does it. I fill it out, just signed mine the other day. It's the same form that I filled out when I was on the Carbondale City Council. So that one we've got covered. The first point you made, though, is something that I really like, and we got to that point after working on the draft of our revised SEI for some time and decided, you know what we really need to do. One of the problems is this is a hard document to fill out, right? for the people because there's no explanation, no definitions. So we've set up a page of definitions, and we've pegged some bright line, easy to figure out numbers. So do you have something in terms of your reported income over a certain amount of money, then you write it down in this line. So it's a really good idea, and yes, our draft includes that. So thank you. And sorry about the long answers to the questions.
No.
My folks complain this as I get into my law professor mode. So sorry about that.
We like nouns at the City Club. Sometimes we have speakers where they have an adjective and adverb crowd. Okay, Don Davis, the Browner Group. Where are you, Don? Over here. Okay. Top three. This is a question that you could go on. That's your staff over there?
There's somewhere. Katie's disappeared. She ran away.
Happens, I know. Okay, do you have any ideas on how to promote economic development in Illinois? Just give us three. I'm sure you'll be able to give us 100.
All right, thank you. Lots of ideas, and in addition to promoting your nephew, who will be an intern in my office, right? We just learned about that.
Isn't this great?
How do you like that? Yeah. For me, it ties back to education. At Georgetown, they have a research institute on jobs and markets in the future. And there's a guy named Anthony Carnevale who's the leading researcher on what our economy, what our workforce needs to look like as we move ahead. And the answer is that the big majority of our jobs are going to go to people with a college credential. And that's why, as a state, we have identified a target of 60% of our working age population by the year 2025 to have a college credential. Now, that doesn't mean everyone needs to be an engineer, but it means a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree from a community college, or a certificate from a community college that makes you more valuable in the workplace. And unless we do that, we have possibilities for economic development, but they're on a different track. I want us to be on the track of high education, high wage jobs, and the only way we can be competitive. Because it used to be that we would look at ourselves against Indiana. What do we do to compete with Indiana? But we need to look at ourselves compared with India, right? We're in a global marketplace, and the best way to make ourselves attractive, in addition to all of the great resources that we have as a state, and right here, between the city, between the agricultural richness of Illinois, we've got a lot going on, but the final piece is to make sure that we're a very well-educated state, and that there's lots of other ways to get to economic development. That's the one that I think is most often overlooked and that I've been advocating for. Good question.
Good question. We have two more questions. Richard Concalde? How close? Good enough. Well, I'm going to Italy. I better start practicing. We'll skip your first one because we've asked a lot of gun questions, but the second one is really interesting, and this one you probably don't get often.
All right.
What is your opinion to have Illinois use e-procurement to buy smarter, be ethical, and be in compliance? E-procurement.
E-procurement. I was on the Illinois Reform Commission when Lieutenant Governor Quinn was presented with a governor who was arrested. He called together some folks and said,
Was that in Illinois?
Was that in Illinois? I have to say, I really enjoy it now when people from other parts of the country say, well, what's the name of that former governor of yours who was in prison? And we don't have to now say, which one? Anyway, the Reform Commission took advantage of the opportunity to use that crisis to look at our laws, and we looked at and made some pretty good changes in terms of procurement. I hear a lot of complaints about the changes we made in terms of procurement. Many of them make things more complicated, and I appreciate that. And some of the complication, I think, frankly, is worth it. For example, in what I do, I have a strict divide between my political operation and my governmental operation. It's kind of wacky sometimes that I have to tell someone, I can't talk with you on this phone. Can I call you back later on my other phone? But because of the state we live in, because of the history that we have, I think it's worth going through the extra steps. I don't know how much e-procurement goes on right now, but it seems like that's something that would, just teeny weeny, okay, is the answer, teeny weeny. It seems like that's something that would lend itself to the kind of transparency that we were shooting for in those Reform Commission recommendations. So it sounds like an area where we have room to grow.
Okay. Well, last question, and you've covered most of this. Eric, is that Lazaz? Lazar. Should I be able to do that? Kedzie and Bryn Mawr. Okay. You don't even remember that, do you? Okay. He's been out of office for a while. All right. Now that the proposed bill between Senators Raoul and that Bivens failed to get to the floor permitting highly restrictive home rule for Chicago, what is the tenor at the State House? Do you think downstate Republicans will capitulate and provide for some sort of Chicago home rule with concealed carry weapon types?
Okay, good question, Eric. Thank you. The answer is there are 3 bills in some stage of floating around in Springfield, right? One in the House, one very restrictive bill, one less restrictive bill, and then a bill in the Senate that came out briefly, and then it was announced we don't have the votes, so don't even bother looking at that anymore. Boy, if I had a crystal ball and could say what's going to happen, I would love that and would be able to enter a different kind of career. But it's a unique situation, as I mentioned before, with the Seventh Circuit really forcing us to do something, right? Pensions are an example of what we have ignored for so long and so long and so long, and this one we can't. So I can't tell you exactly what kind of compromise will be worked out. But I think it will be somewhere in between the two extremes, and I think there's certainly a chance that there might be that local exception. There's provisions for local input, and I think that's very important. I think when we've talked as a working group with sheriffs around the state, the smaller sheriffs, smaller counties said, yeah, we certainly want to have input, but we don't want to be the final decision makers because they saw that as too much of a burden. But they did want to have input. So I think input is important, where that final determination is made and what standard applies for the final determination, whether it's with the state police, Cook County Sheriff, is a question that is yet to be resolved, and no predictions on how that will be resolved, but stay tuned and be ready to read a lot in short amounts of time. That's the plan. Thank you, Eric.
Do we have another question? My goodness. Wait. My goodness. This is the River Awards have just come in. There was I was going to say that was the last question. Lydia, how do you pronounce your name there? Okay, that's how I thought I'd say it. Okay. There's 3 questions. Let's give our speaker the last time. We'll just give her one to knock off. Here we go. On abused women, something that the Lieutenant Governor is working very hard on. Can the state create a program in which government or some agencies can visit homes to tell them about legal services?
Ooh. What an interesting idea. I like the idea, and I like thinking out of the box about domestic violence. When you think about domestic violence, let me paint the picture for you. It's a crime where if I know the past perpetrator and victim, I can predict with some accuracy who the next perpetrator and victim are going to be, because it's going to be the same people. And even with that kind of information that we don't have on any other crime, right? Other crimes, we don't know who's going to be the victim next. But in this area, we really have a lot of data to show that this is a cycle that's repeated. And even with all that information, we don't do a very good job of preventing that violence and making sure that people are in a place of safety, and particularly that the kids in these families are growing up and not seeing violence as the way that grown-ups resolve their disputes. So I don't know whether anyone's looked into the idea of home visits. But I like that you're thinking in a creative way, and we'll certainly be happy to mooch that idea off of you and do some digging. So thank you very much. And any other good ideas, I'm really easy to get in touch with, all over the website. Send me any good ideas, everyone. All right? Thank you very
Round
much.
of applause.